They said it was too late for me. Too late to dream. Too late to believe. My hair had turned gray and my womb had turned silent. Every prayer felt wasted. Every tear felt unseen. And with time I learned to smile in public. And cry only where no one could hear. But one day heaven broke its silence. And the sound of that silence shook my world. I didn't see the angel. I didn't hear the message. But I felt it, deep inside me. The impossible starting to move. When my husband came home he couldn't speak. His eyes were wide, his hands shaking. And though no words came out, I knew something divine had happened. Days passed. Then weeks. And one morning I felt it. Life where there had been none. The promise I buried years ago was now breathing inside me. But instead of telling everyone, I hid. For 5 months I stayed silent. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to hear God clearly. In the quiet, away from the noise. And in that stillness he began to show me things. Things that would soon change the world forever. Let me take you back to where it all began. For as long as I could remember, heaven had been quiet. The prophets had stopped speaking. The miracles had stopped coming. It was as if God himself had gone still. 400 years had passed since any man had heard his voice. 400 years since the fire of prophecy burned across the land. Israel had grown old in the silence. Our elders spoke of the glory days when God walked with our fathers, but those days felt like bedtime stories told to comfort children. And though we still went to the temple, though incense still rose in the air, the hearts of the people were tired. The songs of worship had become routine. Faith had turned into habit. We were living under Roman rule. Their soldiers filled our streets. Their coins carried faces that were not of our God. Many among us whispered, "If God is truly with us, why has he been silent for so long?" Every day the world grew noisier and heaven grew quieter. I was born in that silence. I married in that silence. And I learned to serve God in that silence. My name is Elizabeth, daughter of Aaron, wife to Zechariah, a priest in the house of God. Zechariah was a good man, steady, patient, faithful. His hands carried the smell of incense from years of temple service. He feared God deeply even when heaven felt like a closed door. He believed every promise even when those promises seemed buried under centuries of waiting. Together we lived in the hill country of Judea, far from the noise of Jerusalem. Our home was small but it was filled with peace. Every morning, Zechariah would rise before dawn, wrap himself in his priestly robe and pray facing the east. I would prepare our simple meal, my heart whispering the same old prayer that had lived inside me since our wedding day. Lord, give me a child. First I prayed it boldly. Then softly. Then secretly. Years passed. Seasons changed. The wrinkles deepened on my face and the hope I once carried began to fade. I watched other women hold their babies in the market square, their laughter echoing through the streets. They looked at me kindly but their eyes said everything their mouths would not. She has no child. The priest's wife is barren. That word, barren, followed me everywhere. It was like a shadow I could not shake. In our land, barrenness was more than sorrow. It was shame. A woman without a child was seen as one cursed, one whose prayers were not heard. Some even whispered that such a woman must have angered God. How many times did I ask him to search my heart? How many nights did I cry until my body shook, begging him to show me what I had done wrong? But the heavens stayed silent. Zechariah never blamed me. Not once. He would hold my hands, call me righteous and say, "Elizabeth, the Lord knows." His timing is never late. But I could see the pain behind his words. Every year, as another family named their child, as another young woman carried life in her belly, I could see the question in his eyes. He wondered, as I did, if our prayers had been forgotten somewhere in the sky. Till I prayed. There were days when my faith felt strong, and others when I prayed with no tears left to cry. I had memorized every psalm of David, every promise of the prophets. Yet sometimes even holy words felt like echoes bouncing off a closed heaven. I would walk through our garden and look up at the night sky, counting stars Abraham once counted. I would whisper, "Lord, you gave him a son in old age. Can you not do the same for me?" But the stars said nothing. The wind said nothing. Only silence. And still I loved him. Even when he was quiet, I loved him. Because somewhere deep inside I believed his silence had meaning even if I could not see it. Zechariah continued his priestly duties. There were many orders of priests in Israel, and each took turns serving in the temple. When it was his turn, he would go up to Jerusalem, leaving me behind in the hills. I used to watch him from the window as he walked away with the other priests, their white robes glimmering in the morning sun. I would pray for his safety and for favor in the temple. But this time, yes, the last time he went, something in my heart stirred. It was faint, like a whisper beneath the wind, but I felt it. Something was about to change. I remember the days leading up to it clearly. The sky looked the same. The olive trees swayed the same. But my spirit was restless, as if heaven was drawing breath before speaking again. I told Zechariah, "I feel it in my bones. Something holy is near." He smiled kindly, the way a husband does when he has heard his wife's faith before. He kissed my forehead and said, "Then may the Lord remember you, Elizabeth." That morning I stood outside our home for a long time after he left. The hills stretched wide before me, the air crisp with dawn. I did not know that within those same hills, the voice of God would soon return to Israel, and that voice would begin with my name. The days passed slowly. I filled them with chores, prayers, and silence. I lit the lamp each evening and waited for news from Jerusalem. Priests did not stay long for their turn of service, so I expected Zechariah home within a few days. But when he returned, he could not speak. First I thought he was ill. He tried to tell me something with his hands, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide with something between fear and wonder. He motioned toward heaven, then to me, then to his lips. I touched his face, trembling. "Zechariah, what happened? Why can't you speak?" He tried to write on the ground but was too weak. All he could do was hold my hands and look into my eyes with that same trembling light. And in that silence I felt it again, the same stirring I had felt before he left. God had spoken. I didn't know what had been said. I didn't know how. But I could feel it. Heaven had finally broken its silence, and whatever message my husband had received was written not in ink, but in the air around us. That night I could not sleep. I sat by the window, the moonlight touching my face, my heart beating fast. I whispered, "Lord, are you speaking again?" And for the first time in years I did not feel forgotten. I felt watched. Not by men but by God himself. Days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to notice changes within me. Small at first but impossible to ignore. My body felt alive again. My strength returned. My heart beat faster than usual. One morning as I washed my face, I saw something in the mirror that made me drop the water bowl. My body was changing. At first I denied it. How could this be? I was far past the age of childbearing. My time had ended long ago. But my body was waking up again like a tree in spring after decades of winter. I wept, covering my mouth so the neighbors wouldn't hear. My old hands touched my stomach, trembling. And for the first time I felt the warmth of life growing inside me. My lips shook as I whispered, "Is this real? Have you remembered me, Lord?" The tears that fell that day were not of sorrow. They were of shock, of joy, of disbelief swallowed by faith. Zechariah stood behind me watching. He couldn't speak, but he smiled. A tear rolled down his face. We held each other, both crying, both laughing without words. The silence that had once felt like punishment was now holy. It was no longer emptiness. It was expectancy. I began to see that God had not been quiet because he had forgotten us. He had been preparing us. He was writing something far greater than our little story. For months I carried my miracle in secret. I felt every heartbeat inside me as if God himself was knocking on my soul. I prayed every day, thanking him for remembering me after all these years. But I also began to understand that this child was not just mine. Something inside told me that he belonged to a bigger plan. A plan that reached beyond my lifetime. And in that realization came both joy and trembling. For the first time in centuries, heaven had spoken to earth again. And it had chosen our home to begin. The same God who once parted seas and sent fire now moved quietly within the womb of an old woman. That night I went outside and looked at the stars again. The same stars I had cried under for years. But this time they looked different. They sparkled like witnesses. I whispered, "You were here when I was barren. You saw my tears. And now you see my miracle. You have always been listening, haven't you?" The wind brushed across my face softly, and for the first time, I felt as if it answered back. I had spent years thinking God had turned away. But he was never gone. He was waiting for the right moment to remind the world. And me, that he still moves, still speaks, still creates life out of emptiness. So I kept silent, holding my secret close, afraid to break the holiness of the moment with words. And as I lay that night beside Zechariah, feeling the gentle movement inside me, I whispered to myself the truth that had taken a lifetime to learn. I had learned to smile in public and cry in secret. But heaven was listening even when I thought it was not. The morning it happened began like any other day. The sun rose quietly over the hills of Judea, painting the sky with gold. The birds sang softly in the fig trees, and the smell of fresh bread filled our little home. I woke early to prepare my husband for his temple service, unaware that the whole of heaven was already watching us. Zechariah was calm that morning. Too calm. He said little as he dressed, his eyes thoughtful. He had been chosen by lot to enter the holy place that week, a priest's highest honor, one that most never experienced in their lifetime. It was the day he would stand before the altar of incense and pray for the people of Israel. I remember watching him wrap his robe around his shoulders. My heart swelled with pride. My husband was a righteous man. He had served God all his life with clean hands and a faithful heart. Yet as I tied his belt, a strange feeling washed over me, like the air in the room had changed. I didn't understand it then. But something holy was stirring. He smiled at me before leaving. It was a soft smile full of love and peace. I kissed his cheek and whispered, "May the Lord remember us today." He nodded, squeezed my hand and walked out into the morning light. The sound of his sandals faded down the path. I stood at the doorway long after he disappeared from sight. The air felt unusually still, as though creation itself was holding its breath. That day was long. Too long. Every moment felt heavier than the last. I tried to distract myself with work, grinding grain, sweeping the floor, feeding the goats, but my hands kept trembling. Something inside me whispered, "Today will not end like other days." I stopped often to pray, whispering words that fell like tears. "Lord, speak to us again. Speak to Israel. Speak to my husband." Meanwhile, in the city of Jerusalem, my husband was walking into destiny. I wasn't there, but I've imagined it 1,000 times since. The temple stood tall and radiant, its marble walls glowing white beneath the sun. Hundreds of priests moved about in quiet reverence, their robes brushing against the stone floors. The smell of incense lingered in the air, a holy fragrance that reminded everyone of God's glory and man's smallness. When Zechariah's name was called, he stepped forward with trembling hands. I can see it in my mind as if I were there. He climbed the steps of the temple slowly, aware that he was walking toward something eternal. Inside the holy place, only one priest was allowed at a time. It was sacred ground. Before him stood the golden altar of incense, the lampstand and the table of showbread. The veil that hid the most holy place was just beyond him. Every movement had to be careful, every breath measured. He placed the incense on the altar, and as the smoke rose, it curled upward like prayers reaching for heaven. The fragrance filled the room, sweet and heavy. Zechariah bowed his head. The prayers of Israel were on his lips, the cries of a nation waiting for God to speak again after 4 centuries of silence. But heaven was about to answer. Suddenly the air shifted. The light in the room flickered. And from the right side of the altar, a figure appeared. An angel. Not a dream. Not a vision. A real, living messenger from the throne of God. Zechariah froze. His body stiffened. His heart raced. He had spoken about angels all his life, read about them in the scriptures, but to see one, standing before him radiant with glory, was more than mortal eyes could bear. The angel's presence filled the entire room with light. His robe shone like polished gold. His eyes burned like stars. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like calm thunder. "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard." Every word seemed to hang in the air like a melody. "Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. You shall name him John. He will be great in the sight of the Lord. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many hearts back to God." I imagined Zechariah standing there, mouth open, unable to believe what he was hearing. His heart must have stopped. His mind tried to reason, but the words were too much. "Elizabeth, my wife, the child." He looked down at his wrinkled hands, then up at the angel again. "How can I be sure?" he asked quietly. "I am an old man and my wife is well advanced in years." It was the question of a man who had prayed too long and waited too long to believe quickly. The angel's eyes grew firm. The light around him pulsed brighter. "I am Gabriel," he said, "who stands in the presence of God. I was sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. But because you did not believe my words, you will be silent until the day these things happen." And just like that, the angel was gone. The incense still burned. The light still flickered. But everything had changed. Outside, the crowd waited. The other priests were growing anxious. Normally, the priest who burned incense would come out quickly to bless the people. But Zechariah was taking too long. When he finally stepped out, the crowd gasped. His face was glowing pale. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. He tried to speak, to tell them what he had seen, but his voice was gone. All he could do was gesture wildly, his eyes wide with shock and awe. The people realized something divine had happened. They whispered among themselves, "He has seen a vision in the temple." Zechariah finished his duties silently. When his time of service ended, he began his journey back to me. Back in our home, I was kneading dough when I heard footsteps. I rushed to the door, expecting his usual greeting, a smile, a tired laugh, a story about Jerusalem. But this time there was no voice. He stood in the doorway, covered in dust from the road. His eyes met mine and I froze. Something about him was different. His face shone, not with joy but with awe. His hands trembled as he tried to write on the small tablet he carried. The words came slowly, unevenly. "An angel of the Lord appeared to me." My heart skipped. I stepped closer. What did he say? He wrote again, his fingers shaking. "We will have a son." The world tilted. I stared at the writing, my mind spinning. A son? Me? Zechariah, how? He looked at me with tears filling his eyes, nodding over and over. Then, still trembling, he wrote the rest. "You will call him John. I cannot speak until it happens." I touched his face with both hands, tears streaming down mine. His silence said more than words ever could. I felt a warmth spreading through the room, like invisible hands wrapping us in peace. He could not speak, but I could feel the echo of heaven around him. That night we sat together by the oil lamp. He wrote what little he could remember about the angel, his light, his voice, his words. I read them over and over. Each sentence felt alive, glowing with power. I didn't need to see the angel to know it was real. I felt it. I felt it in the way my heart trembled, in the way my soul suddenly burned with hope. For years I had prayed for a sign. That night I realized the sign was standing right in front of me. The man who could no longer speak because heaven had spoken for both of us. We said nothing more. We simply sat together in the quiet. The fire crackled softly, and outside the night wind hummed through the trees. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of wonder. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. Zechariah was already awake, standing outside, staring at the sky. He turned when he heard me, his eyes shining. He pointed upward, then to me, then to his heart. I nodded slowly. "I know," I whispered. "I feel it too." In that moment I understood something. When heaven speaks, even silence becomes sacred. I spent the rest of that day in quiet prayer. My heart was full and trembling all at once. Every thought, every sound felt alive. I could sense the presence of something unseen, like God himself was walking through the rooms of our little house. The neighbors came by, curious about Zechariah's silence. They asked questions, but I only smiled and said he was fine. They shook their heads, whispering among themselves, "The priest has lost his voice." But I knew better. He hadn't lost his voice. God had borrowed it. Each time I looked into Zechariah's eyes, I saw it, the mix of fear and joy, disbelief and awe. He was living proof that heaven had broken its silence. And so the days passed quietly, but the air around us was different now. It was filled with a holy anticipation, like a storm waiting to burst, but a storm of mercy, not destruction. Every evening, Zechariah would write verses from the Psalms and I would read them aloud. When I said the words, "The Lord has done great things for us and we are filled with joy," he would close his eyes and nod. It was as if those words belonged to us now. I began to notice that even the world around us seemed to respond. The birds sang louder. The fields looked greener. Every sunrise felt like a promise. Sometimes I would look at Zechariah and whisper, "Do you think the world will ever know what happened that day in the temple?" He would just smile, eyes glistening, and write, "They will. When the time is right." I often wondered what the angel looked like, how his voice sounded. But I also realized that God didn't need to send me an angel to prove his power. He had already sent me a miracle in the form of hope itself. That night as I lay in bed I thought about everything. The years of silence, the endless prayers, the tears, the waiting. And now this. An angel had spoken and heaven had moved. I touched Zechariah's hand gently. He was already asleep, breathing softly beside me. I whispered into the darkness, Lord, I believe. I don't need to see to trust you. Whatever you are doing, I will wait for it. The oil lamp flickered and I felt a calmness I hadn't known in years. He could not speak, but I could see hope trembling in his eyes. The morning after the angel's message, everything around me looked the same. The hills were still quiet, the olive trees still swayed, and the doves still cooed softly from the rooftop. Yet something inside me had changed. I could feel it. Zechariah still could not speak. He spent his days writing short words on his clay tablet, pointing at the sky, smiling often. His silence was no longer heavy. It was holy. The peace that filled our home was unlike anything I had ever known. At first I thought the feeling in my body was only my imagination, a dream born out of hope. I was an old woman. My body had forgotten the rhythm of youth long ago. Yet as the days passed, something gentle began to stir deep within me. My heart beat faster. My body felt warm, alive, like it was waking from a long sleep. I didn't say anything to Zechariah at first. I wanted to be sure. But I found myself touching my stomach without thinking, as if my hands knew before my mind did. Then one morning while I was washing by the stream I felt it. A flutter. Soft. Faint. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hand against my belly. The wind around me went silent. And there, beneath my wrinkled skin, something moved again. A tear rolled down my cheek. My knees went weak. I knelt beside the stream, my hands trembling. Oh God, I whispered, my voice shaking, it's true. It's real. I laughed and cried at the same time. My heart couldn't contain it. I had prayed for years and now that it was happening I almost couldn't believe it. The impossible was growing inside me. All the years of waiting, all the nights of silence, every tear I had shed, they had all been leading to this moment. I could almost hear the echo of God's voice in the air. It was as if he was saying, you gave up, Elizabeth, but I didn't. I never stopped working. I was only waiting for the perfect time. I pressed both hands on my stomach, whispering, thank you, Lord. Thank you. When Zechariah came in from the courtyard I ran to him. He looked up, startled, and I grabbed his hands. I couldn't stop smiling. I pointed to myself, then to my belly. His eyes widened. At first he didn't understand. Then he did. He fell to his knees, tears filling his eyes. He took my hands and pressed them to his face. We both wept in silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. He could not talk, but his joy filled the whole house. The days that followed were a blur of wonder. Every sunrise felt new. Every step I took reminded me that there was life inside me, a miracle breathing beneath my heart. Sometimes I would wake in the night, my hands on my stomach, just feeling. I would whisper softly, my child, you are proof that God remembers. I began to talk to the baby even before he could hear me. I would tell him stories of Abraham and Sarah, of Hannah who prayed for a son, of God's promises that never fail. And though I didn't know his name yet, I would say, you will be great. The angel said so. You will prepare the way for the one who is coming. Each day my love for that unseen child grew deeper. But along with joy came something else, fear. There were moments when my heart trembled. What if something went wrong? What if I wasn't strong enough? I was old. My body was fragile. I would place my hand on my chest and whisper, why now, Lord? Why me? And in the quiet of my heart I always felt the same answer. Because I trust you. The thought alone made me cry again. Out of all the women he chose me. Not in my youth, not in my strength, but in my weakness. He waited until I had nothing left to give and then he gave me everything. Soon the neighbors began to notice. Word travels fast in the hill country. Some said they saw a new glow on my face. Others whispered behind closed doors. I could hear them sometimes when I passed by the market. Have you heard? Old Elizabeth is with child. That's not possible. She's too old. Maybe it's a story they made up to hide her shame. Or maybe, just maybe, God really did it. Their voices didn't hurt me like they used to. I smiled quietly to myself. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Only God and I knew the truth. There was one woman, Miriam, who came to my house pretending to bring figs but really wanting to see for herself. When she saw me, she gasped. Her eyes went wide as she covered her mouth. Elizabeth, she whispered, is it true? I looked at her gently and said, God has remembered me. She dropped the basket in shock. Tears filled her eyes. Praise be to the Lord, she said softly. Truly, His mercy has no limit. But even with joy around me, I felt a need to withdraw. There was something sacred about what was happening inside me. I didn't want to speak too soon. I didn't want to turn this miracle into gossip or excitement. I wanted to protect it, hold it close like a secret between me and heaven. So I decided to hide. I told no one except Zechariah. I stayed inside most days, away from crowds and curious eyes. I prayed. I listened. I rested. Those early months were filled with both awe and trembling. Every time the child moved, I felt God's presence fill the room. It was as if heaven itself was breathing inside me. Sometimes I would stop whatever I was doing and just sit in silence, tears running down my cheeks. I would whisper, "Thank you for trusting me with this life." I began to see things differently. The birds outside my window sounded like worshippers. The breeze that entered the room felt like a messenger. Even the quiet creak of the wooden floor seemed to say, "He is faithful." One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with pink and gold, I stood at the doorway of my house and placed my hands on my belly. "My God," I said softly, "you turned my emptiness into life. You turned my sorrow into a song." The tears that fell were sweet, not bitter. I understood now that sometimes God waits until everything seems dead so that no one can doubt that the miracle came from Him alone. As I looked at the glowing horizon, I whispered the words that had become my truth. I gave up, but God didn't. Each night before I slept, I would talk to the child inside me. "You are my joy," I would say. "But you are also more than mine. You belong to the one who sent you. You have a purpose beyond me. The world will one day hear your voice." Sometimes when I said that, the baby would move gently as if responding. Those little movements felt like whispers from heaven. There were moments when fear still crept in. I was human. I would think, what if I don't live to see him grow? What if I can't hold him long enough? But every time those thoughts came, peace followed right after. It was a peace I couldn't explain, a quiet assurance that this was all part of something greater. The days turned into weeks and my body changed more and more. My skin glowed. My strength returned. Every woman in the village whispered my name again, but this time not with pity but wonder. They said, "Elizabeth is blessed." They said, "The Lord has done something new." But I didn't want to stand in the center of attention. I knew this moment wasn't about being seen. It was about being hidden, being quiet, letting God finish what He started. So I stayed home. I prayed. I sang softly to the life inside me. I didn't want noise. I didn't want questions. I didn't want attention. All I wanted was to listen, to feel, to wait. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just my story. It was the beginning of something that would shake the earth. And so I hid. For 5 months I chose silence over celebration. The world outside my door kept moving, but my world had gone still. I had chosen silence not because I was afraid, but because something inside me told me this was not a time to speak. It was a time to listen. The first few days felt strange. I could hear the laughter of children in the distance, the chatter of women in the market, the sound of donkeys on the road. Life carried on as usual. Yet I stayed behind the closed door, my heart burning with a peace I could not explain. Every morning I sat by the small window where sunlight poured in and touched my face. I would whisper prayers into the quiet air. Sometimes words came out softly. Other times only tears did. I would hold my stomach, feeling the gentle movement of the life inside me, and I would say, "You are growing and so am I." These were not ordinary months. Each day felt like a holy secret unfolding. My body was changing, yes, but my soul was changing even more. I began to feel the nearness of God in ways I had never known. I didn't see visions or hear thunder. He didn't speak in the wind or in dreams. He spoke in stillness. The silence became a language between us. When I closed my eyes, I could feel His presence resting on me like warm oil. I felt Him in the rhythm of my heartbeat. I felt Him in the soft weight of the child growing beneath my ribs. Every breath I took seemed to carry His name. I prayed long prayers, not with fancy words, but with the simple truth of my heart. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for trusting me. Teach me how to raise this child. Sometimes I sang. Sometimes I just cried. And sometimes I sat perfectly still, letting the silence wrap around me like a cloak. In those quiet months I understood something that changed me forever. This child was not mine to keep. He was mine to carry. He belonged to God, and I was only the vessel through which His promise would flow. I would often whisper to the life inside me, "You are part of something far greater than you know. You are being formed not just for me but for the world." And in those moments the baby would move and my spirit would tremble. I knew that the same Spirit filling me was filling him too. The Holy Spirit didn't speak through thunder or fire during those months. He spoke through peace. He spoke through stillness. He spoke through the tiny heartbeat that pulsed beneath my hand. Each passing month felt like a chapter of grace. The first month was shock. The second was surrender. The third was joy. The fourth was worship. And the fifth was revelation. By the fifth month I had come to see the purpose of hiding. It wasn't to escape people's eyes. It was to let heaven prepare me for what was coming. When you are hidden, it doesn't mean you are forgotten. Sometimes God hides you because what He is growing in you is too sacred for public view. I learned that waiting in silence is not weakness. It is strength. The kind of strength that comes from trusting God's process even when no one else understands it. Each sunrise whispered hope. Each sunset reminded me that something beautiful was forming both in me and through me. I began to smile again, not the forced smile I had worn for years, but a true one born from peace. I no longer felt the ache of barrenness. I felt the fullness of promise. The walls of my little house had become holy ground. The air itself felt thick with glory. I was no longer just Elizabeth the old woman. I was Elizabeth, the chosen mother of a promise. 5 months passed like a sacred song. And when they were over, I stepped out of my quiet room with tears in my eyes, my heart stronger than it had ever been. I understood then what God had done. Sometimes He hides you to reveal you. He silenced my world so I could hear His whisper. It was early morning when I heard her voice. A soft knock came at my door, followed by a gentle greeting. The moment I heard it, something inside me leapt. Literally. My child moved, not like before but with sudden joy, like he was dancing. I froze, my hand on my belly, tears spilling down my face. Then I heard her again. "Peace be with you, Elizabeth." That voice carried something divine. It was Mary, my young cousin from Nazareth. She looked tired from the long journey, yet her face glowed with a strange light, soft and golden like morning sunshine. Before I could say a word, the Holy Spirit rushed over me like wind. My heart felt fire and peace at the same time. My mouth opened and words poured out before I could stop them. "Blessed are you among women. Blessed is the fruit of your womb. And how is it that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" Mary's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, trembling. We both began to cry, holding each other as heaven filled the room. In that moment I knew. My Lord had entered my home, not in glory or thunder, but in the quiet voice of a young girl carrying eternity inside her. Heaven had entered my house and even the walls could feel it. We sat together for hours that first day, Mary and I. 2 women holding 2 miracles. One young, one old. One womb just beginning to grow, another already swelling with promise. We could not stop smiling through our tears. When I looked at her, I saw my own story reflected in her eyes. We were both chosen in ways that made no sense. Both carrying life that could not exist without the touch of God. She was carrying the Savior. I was carrying the voice that would cry out before Him. The way and the one who would prepare it, both resting beneath our hearts. At night we whispered our fears and hopes to each other. She told me about the angel's visit, about Joseph, about her confusion. I held her hand and said, "You are not alone. Heaven knows your name, Mary. Heaven walks with you." We laughed, we cried, we prayed. Our faith joined like a song only heaven could understand. Every time we spoke of God's goodness, my child would leap again, as if he understood the glory unfolding around us. And when Mary finally sang her song of praise, I felt it, heaven singing with her. The day came quietly, yet the whole sky felt alive. The morning light touched the hills and I felt the first wave of pain. It was deep, sharp, but wrapped in peace. Zechariah rushed to my side, his hands trembling. He could not speak, but I saw the prayer in his eyes. Each breath felt like both agony and worship. My body, aged and worn, was now doing something only God could make possible. Between the cries and the sweat, I whispered his name again and again. You remembered me, Lord. You remembered. Hours passed. Then it happened. A sound filled the room, high, sharp, alive. My baby cried. My tears followed. My heart felt like it would burst. The neighbors came running, their faces full of shock and wonder. The same mouths that once whispered about my shame now shouted with joy. The Lord has shown her mercy, they said. I looked down at the small, wrinkled face resting in my arms. His eyes fluttered, his tiny hands reached upward as if blessing the air. My voice shook as I whispered, "His name is John." In that moment, every year of waiting melted away. My silence ended with a cry, not mine but my son's. The sound of promise fulfilled. The 8th day arrived, bright and full of laughter. The courtyard was crowded with neighbors and relatives, everyone eager to see the child. The sound of joy filled the air, mixed with the cries of my newborn son. They had come to witness his circumcision and to give him his father's name. "Call him Zechariah," one of them said with a smile. "A fine name for a priest's son." I looked at them gently and shook my head. "No," I said, my voice steady, my heart certain. "He shall be called John." The chatter stopped. Faces turned. Some frowned. "But there is no one in your family with that name," they whispered. They looked to Zechariah for approval, but he only reached for his tablet. Slowly, carefully, he wrote the words that would break the silence of his life. "His name is John." At that very moment I heard it. A gasp from the crowd. Zechariah's mouth opened. His voice returned, strong and full of fire. He lifted his hands and began to praise God, words pouring like water after a long drought. "You, my child," he said, tears streaming down his face, "will be called the prophet of the Most High." The people trembled with awe. The news spread through the hills of Judea like wildfire. I held my baby close, my heart overflowing. I had carried the voice that would prepare the world for the word. The silence that began in doubt ended in prophecy. Years have passed since I first held my son, and yet the memory still feels like yesterday. The sound of his first cry still echoes in my heart. The scent of that holy day still lingers in my soul. Every wrinkle on my hands carries the story of what God did for me. I have had many quiet nights to think, to look back at the road behind me. And now I understand what I couldn't see before. God's silence was never punishment. It was preparation. He was shaping me in the waiting. He was building strength in the stillness. When I hid for those 5 months, I thought he was keeping me apart. But he was drawing me close. He was teaching me that miracles grow best in secret places. The verse I once whispered through tears has now come alive in me. This is what the Lord has done for me. He has looked on me to take away my reproach among men. But I see it now. It wasn't just shame removed. It was glory revealed. He turned my emptiness into purpose. He turned my tears into testimony. So to you who wait, to you who feel forgotten, I say this: God's silence is not absence. It is preparation for something so glorious that when it comes, you will finally understand why He made you wait. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Click the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that God's silence is never the end. It's only the beginning of a miracle. Whose story from the Bible would you like to hear next? Should we tell the story of Hannah, the woman who prayed in silence, or Uriah, the soldier who carried his own death letter? Write your choice in the comments. Your pick might be our next episode.